Boy, that was slow. CMTB definitely needs two. Good morning, everyone, to the Oversight Board members and folks that have tuned in to watch and to keep up with what's going on here. Welcome to our August 20th meeting of the DCYF Oversight Board. Appreciate everyone being here. Today, my co-chair, Sharonda, will not be with us. She has some issues to work out with her family. She's helping her family going through a tough time. So we do wish her all the best, and our prayers are with her. We have one more meeting this year. We'll be coming up on November 17th. Looking forward to that. And at that meeting, we will be electing a new set of co-chairs. So, kind of keep that in mind just a little bit I've had conversations with 2 or 3 folks that are interested in that position. So hopefully we'll be able to make a smooth transition into the new year. And we will also approve our annual report that we're going to work on today. So there's a lot of issues that are out there right now. We're hearing a lot of concerns and comments from folks, and I have my challenges with this too. Some issues that I'm concerned with. So think about anything you'd like us to include on the November agenda, and we'll put it on there if we can. Actually, at the moment, I've suggested we have a little longer meeting in November, possibly extended out to 4 hours, so we can cover more topics. And those of you that have concerns, we can discuss those and take a look. So, and some of those concerns that we have are of the state auditor's report, findings regarding the funding administered by DCYF. Upcoming changes in the adolescent programs as a result of the agency's reorganization with client services and prevention. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on today. And a major increase in reported placement exceptions during 2022. This will also be reviewed and discussed today. So by the end of today's meeting, we'd like to hear from the board on what topic of those mentioned and any of these topics that you'd like to dig into in a deeper way. So again, I appreciate everyone that is here. I appreciate your attendance. I appreciate your willingness to serve on this very critical committee, and it has to do with our children of the state. And there's a lot of issues that we look at, deal with, and talk about that are hard. And we all understand that. And I thank you for your participation. So, Krista, could you call the roll, please?
Do we want to? Just a second. We got some feedback.
And I like to be an Olympian. I had planned on being there today, but with the fire and Stevens Pass being open and closed, it worked out best for me to just retreat back to Moses Lake from where I was yesterday. So okay. I so miss in-person meetings.
Oh, you know what? I think
Testing. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Should be able.
I think maybe I unmuted myself.
They're all really kind of frozen.
Can everyone hear us?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you, Krista.
Okay. So I think we got that figured out. Our internet seems to be a little choppy in this location, but I'll call in if need be. So just let me know if I do get a little bit broken up.
Okay, you sound good. You're frozen on the screen, but you sound good. So I could tell a little story while we're letting Krista Nicholas work on this. I was in Leavenworth yesterday, and I was one of two presenters. One of my colleagues and I had an hour to present to this group of people. So my colleague went first, and I assumed that we were going to maybe split the time evenly. And after 5 minutes, he wrapped up his comments and said, Representative Dent, the next 55 minutes are on you. So I guess I could talk. I only made 52 minutes and I ran out of things to say. So
no computer doesn't need that for anymore.
Oh, I do have my docking station. Yeah.
I don't know if any of these are live, but I brought an Ethernet cord with me in case there was connectivity issues.
Oh, my document in my...
Oh, you have your Ethernet cord.
Well, good morning, Bobby. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm in Hawaii, so it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm, drinking coffee and trying to catch up with you all.
There you go. How's the weather? Is it nice?
The weather's nice, except it rained a fair amount yesterday. I think it's coming to the West Coast too.
Yeah, I'm supposed to have rain tomorrow. Yeah.
Yep. But other than that,
Katie.
it's
Pardon me?
It's lovely. Oops.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm out in Duval.
Morning, Katie.
We are really struggling with air quality out here. So
where are you at?
Where are you, Katie?
Duval. So outside of Seattle, kind of the foothills. We have the fire outside of Snoqualmie, and then the Bolt Creek fire kind of sending a lot of smoke our way. So
I hear it's bad in Seattle too. Our pet sitter has been complaining somewhat about it.
Oh goodness, yeah. My kids are very ready to be able to play outside. I'm very ready for my kids to be able to play outside.
Well said.
Bobby, we actually moved into, good morning, we actually moved into the very unhealthy range in Seattle. We are in the purple, which is surprising for this time of year. What island are you on?
Kauai.
Nice. Lots of chickens.
Love it. Coming back Sunday. So hopefully you guys will get the air clear.
The host would like you to unmute the microphone. You can press *6 to unmute. You are unmuted. You are unmuted. You are unmuted. You are unmuted. You are.
Oh God.
We'll try this again.
Sure.
We're trying this again. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We will do the best we can with what we got. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So I think we will do roll call and see who's here. Board members, please unmute yourself and let me know that you are present. Katie Byron.
Present.
Thank you. Justice Bobby Bridge.
Present.
Thank you. Ben DeHaan.
Present.
Thank you, Ben. Co-chair Tom Dent.
Tom Dent's here.
Thank you. Sydney Forrester. Lonnie Greniger. Ruth Kagi.
Here.
Thank you, Ruth. Annie Lee. Dr. Diane Levy. Charles Loeffler. Lois Martin.
Here.
Thank you, Lois. Representative Tana Sen. Senator Judy Warnick.
I'm here.
Thank you. Senator Claire Wilson. And I believe can Assistant Attorney General Kristen Lamson confirm she's on the call? Present. Thank you. So currently we have 6 board members present. We have received emails that Lonnie and Charles will be joining us. They have some conflicts, so they're in and out of the meeting throughout the discussion today, but that would put us at 8, which is quorum.
Is that, well, right now we have 5 or 6 right now. I thought we had 7, maybe not.
Oh, you're correct. Sorry, we have 7 currently, so that would put it, yes.
So that would be a quorum, correct? Or we need 8?
We need 8 to be quorum.
Okay, so Kristen, can we proceed?
Technically, the better practice is to adjourn. If you don't have quorum, quorum is required to conduct business. Technically,
but we certainly, Kristen, can't we have a discussion without a quorum?
You can have a discussion without a quorum. I think there's some risk that starting a discussion that is part of the business has some risk that you don't have a quorum to do the business, and you're starting to do the business that would include all of the other board members. So technically, the practice is to adjourn the meeting until you have a quorum.
Is it, would it be acceptable if we paused for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something, and to see if we can, see if we obtain a quorum?
Yeah, I think you can adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes and come back and see if you can get people on the line.
Okay, well, I would entertain a motion that we would adjourn this meeting for 15 minutes.
So moved.
Second. That's been moved by Senator Warnick, seconded by Lois Martin. Any comments, discussion? None. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Or put your thumb up on the screen so I can see you. Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you. We will reconvene at that would be 10:25. Okay.
Okay.
So hello again, everyone. It's now 10:25, and I'd like to call the DCYF Oversight Board meeting back to order. And Krista, could you follow up with the roll call to establish that we have a quorum?
Yes. Board members, please let me know if you are present. Katie Byron. Katie Byron. We'll come back to Katie. Justice Bobby Bridge.
Present.
Ben DeHaan.
Present.
Co-chair Representative Tom Dent.
Tom Dent's here.
Sydney Forrester. Lonnie Greniger. Ruth Kagi. Ruth Kagi. Come back to Ruth. Annie Lee. Dr. Diane Levy. Charles Loeffler. Lois Martin.
Present.
Thank you, Lois. Co-chair Shram Slivanoff. Absent. Representative Tana Sen.
Here.
Thank you. Senator Judy Warnick.
I'm here.
Thank you. Senator Claire Wilson. And to revisit from the top, Katie Byron.
Present.
Thank you, Katie. And Ruth Kagi. So with Ruth on the panel, and if she is present, we have quorum.
Okay, so did Ruth, she hasn't acknowledged, so maybe I thought they had determined it was at 10:25 is when we would call back to order. Yeah. Well, no, let's just pause for just a second and see if Ruth is having some technical problems. Ruth will be on in just a second. I see her.
Ruth, can you let us know that you are present as we call you for our last roll call member?
Present.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Apologies.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate that. Maybe I wasn't as clear as I needed to be on when we were going to come back in a session. So thank you for that. So Krista, would you like to review the minutes from our September 15th meeting?
Yes. The board's last meeting was on Thursday, September 15th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The meeting was called to order at 10 a.m. The first agenda item was presented by Allison Krutzinger, DCYF's Director of Government Affairs and Community Engagement. Allison presented on DCYF's 2023 legislative agenda. Allison provided draft legislative agenda and the DCYF's draft legislative agenda, including agency request legislation and decision packages to the board for the 2023 session. DCYF hosted a public webinar on the same topic on September 23rd, 2022. The webinar information was shared with the board. The second agenda item is titled the Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act, CAPTA Citizen Review Panel. Presenters include Jacob D'Annunzio, my apologies for that pronunciation, from the Office of Public Defense and the panel chair, Ron Murphy from Casey Family Programs and a panel member, and Ryan Murray from the Washington Association of Child Advocate Programs and also a panel member. Jacob provided the Oversight Board with a history and context of the original organization of all CAPTA citizen review panels in Washington State and how the panels have changed in scope and membership over the years. Ron discussed recent advances of working with DCYF to establish the racial equity and inclusive citizen review panel that has been built from the work and foundation originally set by the Washington State Racial Disproportionality Advisory Committee, or WASRDAC. Recommendations made by the Children, Youth, and Family Services Citizen Review Panel in the 2023 Annual Progress and Services Report were presented to the board to illustrate the panel's scope of work and commonalities with board interests. Recommendations focused on racial disproportionalities, education for youth and care, and data tracking and monitoring regarding recent large-scale policy reforms. Jacob outlined the Citizen Review Panel's priorities for the coming year, including focuses on moving away from mandatory reporting laws and moving toward mandatory supporting laws, BIPOC contractors' experiences with DCYF, outcomes for infants with exposure to substances, and outcomes of families with an incarcerated parent. Jacob proposed the opportunity for the Citizen Review Panel and the Oversight Board to partner and collaborate on shared interests moving forward to strengthen and streamline efforts influencing DCYF decision-making. The next agenda item was public comments, and we have summarized both written and in-person public comments in the notes. The last agenda item was the DCYF Workforce Strategy presented by Secretary Ross Hunter of DCYF, and he was joined by Paul Smith, DCYF's Critical Incident Report Program Manager. Secretary Hunter shared with the board DCYF workforce strategies to address retention and recruitment across the agency's divisions. Acknowledging workforce challenges facing industries nationwide, Secretary Hunter identified root causes of retention and recruitment efforts for JR, child welfare, contracted services, and IT. He also talked about how the agency is innovating and addressing these issues to ensure families and children receive consistent and quality service, as well as to ensure the workforce is supported. While identifying unique challenges to workforce retention and recruitment for each of the agency's divisions, Secretary Hunter also identified areas of opportunity, including wage increases and professional development pathways. In addition to pursuing these changes into the future, Secretary Hunter described the agency's current work, including the Child Welfare and Indian Child Welfare Act workload study, set to produce results in spring 2023. DCYF's leadership development project led by Dr. Joel Odimba to understand the needs of DCYF staff, development of a retention tracking framework by the HR data analytics team, and potential expansion of a successful child welfare telework pilot. Additional agency work underway includes the redesign of the family practice model, identifying and supporting staff mental health and wellness needs, as well as changes to hiring processes. The board requested additional information regarding how staff currently experience critical incidents and the supports available to staff when the traumatic incidents occur. A final agenda item was to be a Q&A with DCYF and to debrief the agenda of the meeting. With limited time left in the meeting, the DCYF Oversight Board staff requested additional follow-up questions from board members after the adjournment of the meeting and will present DCYF's responses to the board accordingly. The meeting was adjourned at 2 p.m.
Thank you, Krista. Do we have any additions, corrections, or comments on the minutes from the board members? If not, hearing none, we'll let the minutes will stand as read. So Krista, would you like to take us through the draft report this morning?
Yes, thank you, Representative Dent. To begin with, I want to state that this draft report is updating the report from last year. that was approved. Our goal for today and for our following meeting, since we do have a lot of content to cover, given the number of outcomes the board's responsible for reviewing the agency's performance on, is to be efficient and really to focus on the board's position statements throughout the report, any performance status changes per outcome area, and also board recommendations in specific areas. I do want to acknowledge that we've received feedback that the report can be considered watered down, and I encourage board members to share their own individual positions and opinions about issues. And if the majority of board members agree, we will include that in the report. We are going to do a rather scattered review of the report today. I've provided that to board members by number, and I will walk us through what those are. And this is because we're still waiting on some data updates this month for the final outcomes that we did not get data updates on as of yet. So any questions about the review before I get us started? And please feel free to speak up and raise your hand, board members, throughout this process. I acknowledge that Pregnancy Brain has played a role in my recent crafting of the report, so any opinions and ideas and discussion are welcome for the whole board to discuss. So our first outcome measure page that we have ready for review is number one outcome that the board has shifted from the last outcome that's listed in the legislation to number one, which is eliminating racial and ethnic disproportionality and disparities in system involvement and across child and youth outcomes in collaboration with other state agencies. So for consideration, last year, the board decided that this area needed improvement by the agency. So I've highlighted that here. And as we discuss what's involved and what the updates have been to this area, the board can discuss whether or not that status remains the same or would rather change it to on track or off track as well. So part of this content remains the same from previous report, in which we acknowledge there's a lot of work underway regarding the agency looking to measure racial and ethnic disproportionalities and disparities across its systems, which requires a lot of system integration. That work continues. So this statement, and to begin with, recognizes that. We have broken it down into 3 subsections that are the major areas of the agency's performance. And this is, again, the structure is the same as last year, but the content has been updated. So for the child welfare section, we reflect on the placement process and where the majority of disproportionalities are attributed to intakes. And so we've written in context what those disproportionalities are represented as and have been presented to the board by DCYF earlier this year. And I guess I would like to ask the board, to what level would you like me to go into reading some of this content versus focusing on the recommendations as follow-up?
This is Bridge. Go
ahead, Bobby.
I just would prefer that we focus on the recommendations going forward.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Okay. So I'll move down. So we do have, again, a summary statement on early learning and a summary statement on juvenile rehabilitation, which has been presented to the board through the last year. I'll add that content we've added here has been DCYF's achievements regarding racial equity and the changes they've made in 2022. So I have that with this list of policy achievements, as well as additional actions administered by DCYF. That was all presented to the board this summer. I did have this left and track changes as statement. So in response to calls for concrete commitments and deliberate actions to address racial inequities observed in child and family services, DCYF has made progress in developing a number of internal structures and policies, as well as external programs, services, and partnerships to advance racial equities. The reason I left that highlighted is it is a position statement by the board, and I wanted to make sure that reflected the board's opinion regarding these advancements. And if not, we can change it or take it out.
Krista, I just really appreciated this very clear delineation of the actions that the department has taken and and most of which we have been briefed on. And to me, it really reflected on the progress and the work the department is doing. So I know there are still shortcomings, but I really appreciated the way you delineated this.
Sure. Are there additional thoughts on at least that statement about the progress made? Acknowledging there's still more work to do.
Chris, you know, I'm having a hard time following our draft report and what you have on the screen. So I'm trying to catch up here and I haven't.
No problem. We started on page 9. So
Okay.
There's a lot of entry sections that we're working on still, but we started on the outcome measure review starting on page 9. My apologies. I should have made that stated that page number in the beginning. And I see Lois, you have your hand raised.
I do. So I'm just trying to figure out, and maybe you can help me understand why we need to even add that last sentence and not just end with our observations.
You're referring to the sentence?
So yeah, so you know, in response for calls, you can read it, everyone can read it. I just don't see why we have to do a pat on the back when and just not stick to our observations, because unless we're going to lay out what those internal structures and policies are in this report to be able to substantiate that addition, I think that it shouldn't be there, and just leave it with supports and programming in order to achieve equity and stop.
Okay, we do, the following sections are the outlines that we were presented on this summer of what they have done this last year. So we have the DCYF planning and policy achievements. These were presented by Ross during the summertime. Changes in this last year regarding racial equity and advancing the work. And then below that, we have an additional bulleted list.
Right.
Changes the agency has taken on that address it as well. But
right, but I still don't think, I think that people can read that information and draw their own conclusions. I just don't think it, I think it changes the way a reader might even stop and say, oh, okay, the oversight board thinks that they've made these advancements. Let me move to the next section. I just think that we just lay it out and let people draw their own conclusions about whether or not DCYF has made progress or not. I just think it's important for us to that's just my opinion. I just don't think it needs to be there.
And I'll open it up for board discussion for the only thing I would say in response is that we do need to decide on the performance status in this area as a board. So I guess the question is whether or not that statement would support the board's overall agreement that there is progress being made, but work remains to be done. And if that would change this performance status at the top of the page, which we could keep it as needs improvement, or we could say that the categories we've used have been on track, needs improvement, and off track, or inconclusive because of lack of data that won't allow us to make a conclusion. So I understand what you're saying, Lois. I just open it up to the rest of the board to discuss regarding, we have in the past made a decision as a board whether we believe it's on track or needs improvement and so forth.
No, that's not what I'm referring to, Krista. I'm just referring to that one
statement.
That one statement, that's all.
Okay. And I see Representative Sen, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that what if we moved that sentence down to where the next red sentence is, where it says more work, and then just says, so it says they have done all this stuff, and then however more work remains. So then it's kind of together that it's acknowledging what they have accomplished and that there's more work to do. And so then that is in kind of the recommendation section altogether instead of having it split in two places, because both more work remains is a judgment and not just an observation. And so combine that with the observation from the former sentence, I think connects the two, and maybe it would be a good combination.
So I'll do that just so we can see what Representative Sen is suggesting, but I do want to maintain that and respond to Lois's recommendation that we keep this first statement out.
Right. So I guess
other thoughts, Ruth? I see you have your hand raised.
Well, I just would like to support Representative Sen's comment. I think it is important for us to acknowledge the progress that is being made, and also the fact that a lot more needs to be done. So I think putting them together at the end makes a lot of sense.
Lois, did you have any additional thoughts or feedback in response to that?
I think that if you want to say in response to calls for concrete commitments and deliberate actions to address racial inequities observed in child and family services, comma, more work remains to be done to eliminate, I think taking that part and putting it together.
Okay.
And then maybe taking that, combining those two, and then following up with DCYF is making progress or something like that. But I just, DCYF is making progress in this area. To me, it's enough.
Okay. Justice Bridge.
I raised my hand to say ditto about Representative Sen's remarks, but I don't think this is actually so bad to have the sentence here that kind of incorporates that we've had. I mean, part of this is that we do make our own observations and not just let the reader draw their own conclusions. If we can speak as a board, and of course, that's what we're debating here now. And I think that, at least in my opinion, we can and should make a statement. And this does say that we've asked for concrete commitments and deliberate actions. The above, the foregoing identifies some of those, but progress outlined here is encouraging, but there's more work to be done.
Okay.
So,
yeah, Lois.
Oh, sorry. So,
okay.
Bobby, I would agree with that. I guess I think placing it the way that Representative Sen suggested and putting it at the bottom, I think fits in better than having it at the beginning. That was my point.
Yeah, and so we're in agreement. Yeah, I agree.
And Representative Dent?
Thank you. So I agree a little bit. I agree a little bit with everyone, but you know, the one statement in there, the DCYF has made progress in developing a number of internal structures. You know, that's a pretty generic statement. It really doesn't say what they've done. They just said they've made progress. And you know, I guess I'm a more pragmatic guy. I'd like to know, well, what progress did we make? What did we do? And it doesn't say that. It just says that we've made progress. So. You know, I like what the statement that we put together here now that you put in there. I think is good. And DCYF is making progress is fine, but I think to go beyond that, then we need to have some concrete. We need to have some facts of what they've actually done.
Okay.
Well, that's what the point of the foregoing reference to the foregoing was, because that's what all this stuff that's in the bullet points and the bullet points. That's the reference. I think those are the examples of the structures, et cetera, that have been undertaken.
Yeah, there's two sections. So there's the first list of bullet points are DCYF internal structures that they've adopted The first one being in response to the governor's executive order earlier this year to develop a PAIR team, which all agencies are required to do. DCYF has done that, as well as within their internal racial equity and social justice policy that they've implemented, and the inclusive racial equity change team. So these are DCYF driven things internally within their workforce that they have done this year. And then the additional list of bullet points or other advances, some are from policy changes, but as we can see, increased relative placement rate, and we should have an updated data point for this year that will include in there, but changes from before when DCYF existed to this year. But we could see child-specific licensing and other things were also supported by some legislative supports and changes as well, but the agency has implemented them or done them in partnership. So with the citizen review panel focused on racial equity and citizen review, has been something in partnership with that, the CAPTA citizen review panel, and DCYF did take that on and has been progressing that work. So it's a mix of two different buckets of internal structures as well as some externally influenced work, but the agency has accomplished them. And see, Representative Dent, your hand's still up. Did you have more? You want? Okay. Ben?
I have an observation about the bullet points. They some of them are pretty general, and the tie back to equity and social justice is really kind of tenuous. For example, closing the Nacelle Youth Camp, was that really a social justice move, or was that really related to the economics of having only 20 youth in a very remote location that was very expensive? When you talk about increasing graduation rates at Echo Glen, that's not specific to racial justice or racial issues or social justice in any way. I wonder if we could recommend tightening that up to have those bullet points more closely relate to supporting the fact that they have made progress. Because I think some of them are very relevant, but some of them really are pretty loosely associated with it.
Okay, I think that's understandable. Representative Sen, did you have additional comments?
Yeah. First, in direct response to Ben's comments, absolutely closing Nacelle was hugely a racial equity issue. Absolutely. As frankly, the high school graduation rate, given the racial makeup of youth at Echo Glen, and so ensuring that young people don't, enter the work life without high school graduation is really important. I was going to actually add that they're also through Fair Start for Kids funded permanent positions at DCYF in multiple languages to communicate in numerous languages. So I think there were 3 staff people hired to communicate in the 3 top languages. So I just wanted to add that. And I do think it is important, while I have the floor, to acknowledge the progress of DCYF, both just to the public, but also frankly to DCYF's efforts that they are working on this. It is a work in progress, but they have made advances. And so I think it's always great to acknowledge people's work and that there's still room to grow.
Okay. And just a reminder too, as with previous reports, I might write a note in here that isn't fully complete thought, but I will definitely go back to it and fill in the holes as needed. Ben, I see that your hand is up again, I think, in response.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just didn't lower it.
Oh, okay. Lois.
So I think that, and following up on what Ben shared, that if these are going to be listed as social justice issues, then we need to explain how. Okay. Like, for instance, increase high school graduation at Echo Glen, and is that for Black and other other young people of color? I think if we're going to put some of these things in, then we need to have the data to back it up and not just have general blanket statements. as to how it fits in with advancing racial equity or social justice. And I know we have this as a needs improvement and the board would have to decide, but if that's is what it should still have. But I think when we talk about more work remains to be done, is that it's important for us to even find a way to quantify that, because that's so vague. And I just think, I know I mentioned it before, but I just think if we're going to put something like that, then we need to say more work around what.
So I hear that. And what I'm going to do, what I think that might be a good place, well, either way, and I propose to the board that we could definitely put it more in context of the actual review of the work. We do have 2 additional sections for this, which includes the contributing factors and future performance, which we included in our report last year, to acknowledge changes that are being made both within the agency or around the agency that might affect performance moving forward. Many of these have remained the same from previous reports, so we could decide whether or not that is still of contextual significance. And then down here, we do have also the recommendation section. One thing I have added to this report, since there's been a call for monitoring of the board's work and position on previous issues, is I've added this new section called follow-up from 2021 recommendations, in which I take any recommendations we had from our previous report, pull that title of that recommendation into this section, and then reflect on progress that has or has not been made regarding that recommendation from last year. So I do want to acknowledge that there's space here for the board to have very specific recommendations on what maybe that progress should look like, as well as reflecting on, again, the past where we've requested very concrete and significant commitments around this space. And maybe the board feels that there's a reflection to be made there on previous recommendations made. So I think, Lois, what you're getting at, maybe we best put in these 2 sections, but I'm happy to include it elsewhere as well.
Yeah, and then even with this, that whole under the statement, I've been reading those throughout the report. I think and I know we've had board meetings where we've talked about the oversight board's role, but I guess the question is, if we really want to affect change, then we do have to take that stance of being able to really point out the things that are missing and sharing that with the department so that we can begin to support DCYF in becoming the agency that everyone had high hopes it would be.
Ben?
I'm sorry, did I raise my hand again?
Yeah, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to do that, okay. Sorry.
So in response to Lois's comments, one, I guess the question is, this summarizes a statement we've made before, but we can rewrite it as well to say there's progress has been made, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Is there an interest in, one, rephrasing that, or we could continue with a recommendation and outline exactly specific areas that the board has expectations and how to advance racial equity in regards to what has been done, but what needs to be done. Ruth? Oh, Ruth, you were up and then you were down.
Sorry. Okay. Lois, I wonder if you have any specific recommendations you would like included in this section that would give some direction to DCYF and the legislature.
Well, the one that comes to mind off the top of my head, Ruth, is being able to have more disaggregated data on the youth that are impacted by some of these. Let's say, for instance, like I had mentioned before, I'm going to pull up my report on my computer and I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, you know, if they're saying these things that have further racial equity and social justice, you know, for them to be specific as to how that has occurred. The youth camp is a great example, high school graduation, eliminating child support referrals, how? So for instance, if you're going to share out anything that's a win, you need to be able to back it up as to how that impacted children and families of color, as well as our children and families that are part of the LGBTQ community, and those often intersect. I think to be able to talk about now you have a racial equity change team. So what has it done, especially when you consider that a majority of the ResJ team has resigned and moved on to other positions? I'm just saying that there are different things to say, like, for instance, you know, how are you going to, what is the department's plan, the agency's plan to be able to ensure that ResJ is implemented throughout the organization as part of its internal training process? I think that there are more questions that we can ask about how these things are going to happen, and they don't have to be that specific, because I know we've been told that we can't get into the weeds. But I think that there are different things that we can look at and ask the agency to be conscious of as they look into implementing any plans around these performance indicators for 23. I know that was a long answer, but you know, that's what I could think of off the top of my head.
I think it's a good observation that we absolutely need, need the data to be able to make draw the conclusions about whether we are advancing or not in terms of racial equity. And I guess my question to Krista is, does the current data provide us with, with that information so we can draw conclusions about, the youth graduating from Echo Glen? Is that improving racial disparity or not, or, the other elements that we identify?
I think it's a great question. And I do believe there's data, particularly when we look at Nassau Youth Camp, as well as the high school graduation rates at Echo Glen. We could probably look at data that illustrates if that's the case, and make that more clear. The data is out there. So yes, we can do that. I think the challenge we face in some ways, which is not a new challenge with regards to the specific outcome measure, there's so much data, and we've had different data points presented by the agency regarding addressing racial disproportionalities and disparities, is defining what do we include in this report, knowing that in and of itself, that could be its own report with a wealth of information and data. And so here was an attempt to try and summarize some of those highlights, and that was done on my behalf just to make sure it fits within our already 70-page report. But that is something that we could definitely do a better job of pulling out specific data points in those areas. And we can definitely ask the agency to continue to prioritize that. I know their work as they continue to standardize the measurement of race and ethnicity across all their divisions is ongoing. And so we will probably see more of that data reported as that advances. It's a cumbersome work with all the different databases and systems that they work with across early learning, child welfare, and JR. To be able to do so, but that will likely lead to more data in the future in that respect too. But yes, there's data we can include for sure, and then defining what specific data we want in this one section is always a bit of a challenge to illustrate that. Lois?
Krista, I have a suggestion too. I think it would also be helpful, and this is something the department should be able to share with you, is to be able to designate what is a racial equity category and which is social justice, because, and as well as if we can put something to define those two underneath, because if we're going to say that these actions have equity and social justice, those are two different concepts, and people use them together, but they don't necessarily mesh in different situations. So I think it's important for us to be able to separate the two and be able to look at that list and put like in, you know, RE or SJ or something by it so that it's very clear.
Okay.
Because otherwise, if you look at this, right, then if you're trying to say that I'm thinking of a good one here. Repealing parents' pay. No, that's not a good one. Providing workforce retention grants for childcare providers. You know, how is that racial equity? When a majority of childcare providers across the state, I think, are at least that are listed in merit are white. So maybe that's under social justice, but I think for us to be able to take the time, it also shows an awareness that the board knows the difference. And for those, you know, some may not, but they can be challenged to find out.
Is that a fact that most are white? I find that surprising.
Sorry, Representative Sen, you're a little bit faint. I'm not sure if everyone's.
Sorry, I was just surprised and I guess question whether a majority of the childcare providers are white.
I don't personally conclusively know, but we can find out.
Well, if you look at the information that's shared, Representative Sen, or even just look at the demographics of childcare across the state with those who choose to share, and maybe it could be that, again, this is something that we've always talked about, right? The importance of having that information and merit. But if you just look at the demographics of our state, the demographics in childcare would be similar. Even if there is a higher amount disproportionately, that might be, but that doesn't mean you necessarily are the majority.
Okay. Ben?
Another example of what Lois is talking about is the increased placement with relatives. That's both a social justice and a racial equity issue because it has a disproportionate effect on communities of color. We've had in Washington a very, very, very low relative placement rate. So for the entire issue of placing with relatives, that's social justice, but it does have an embedded racial equity component as well. And I think that needs to be clarified. Because of course, the overwhelming number of children in care are white, we know that, but the disproportionate effect on communities of color needs to be called out.
I think it's a great point. And I've put that in here. So what I'm thinking is we'll include this in a recommendation to identify and distinguish between the two concepts, but also to have the agency identify when regarding these achievements, the intentionality behind, is it advancing racial equity, social justice, or both? And to understand how they interplay. Yeah.
Right. And also, an issue like disaggregating the data. In the child welfare component of DCYF, that's been required under federal statute for years. But I think that the progress is being made in the other areas of DCYF. So saying what it is that they're doing that goes beyond what the federal requirements are in child welfare, and then specifying what additional steps they're taking in early learning and juvenile justice would be really helpful.
Okay. And like I said, we'll flesh out these recommendations in a more cohesive way, and I'll send that out to the board so the board can have additional reflection and feedback to make sure it captures these concepts. Is there any other thoughts or additions or reflections on this particular outcome area, since the recommendations is the last section per outcome area? Ben, I'm assuming your hand is still up by accident, but if you have additional comments, please let us know. Okay. So we'll move on. We have, per our agenda, we have 4 more minutes on this first review section.
Krista, we'll just continue right through our time to have the break, because we started late and we'll be fine doing that.
So we're okay continuing through the break.
As long as everyone's in agreement with not having a break. So it appears that everyone is, so.
Okay. Thank you. So the next outcome area that we have data updated for is the kindergarten readiness rate. This starts on page 12 of the draft report. So this is data that comes from OSPI's report card. We definitely were seeing last year a marked trend of increasing kindergarten readiness, even though the overall rate for the students across the state is low at 51.5% in 2019-2020 school year. One thing to acknowledge, and we stated this in our report last year, is that because of COVID and the schools were shut down, we don't have kindergarten readiness data for the 2020-21 school year. So the most recent data point we have is for this past school year that ended this summer. So we have 2 areas of overall data to look at. One is the statewide percentage of students who entered kindergarten readiness in all 6 areas of development. And then we also include one that's broken down by race and ethnicity. And so we can see some changes and trends there, and the effect that COVID had on some of that. Lois.
So, Krista, is it possible for us to put someplace in there that the enrollment and overall in public schools across Washington has, especially for kindergarten, 1st grade, has gone down post-pandemic? And I know OSPI is trying to figure out where those kids are. You know, maybe they went to private schools. You know, we don't really know. But I think before we, I just think that should be added, because we're not really sure on, we're giving ourselves a pat on the back, but we have children who we are not really sure where they are. So can we really claim that progress is happening when our enrollment is down and a lot of children are still not in schools? So I just think we should just put something maybe, you know, just in there just to say that, you know, we're keeping an eye on this data for 22-23, as we're hoping that, you know, enrollment in public schools will rise again, so that we can ensure that this data is really reflective of where our children are.
Yes, great point. And so what I'll do is I'll probably incorporate it in the context narrative, but we will definitely have it as a contributing factor on performance, and highlight that this reflects on how much we can conclude performance regarding that issue.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other, oh, sorry, I'll go back up to the data. I'll just make that note to myself and come back to it. So back up to the data we have, and this formatting will of course be fixed for the final report. The spacing just moves off. So we see a slight decrease for overall statewide of the children that are considered kindergarten ready in all 6 domains. And then we have by race and ethnicity and see similar trends, but some slight differences based on each racial and ethnic group. Senator Warnick?
Yeah, I would like to know what the actual numbers are of eligible children for kindergarten. Do we know how many children are in the state that are eligible, whether they're enrolled or not? And because we had a discussion a couple days ago about the lack of enrollment in certain community colleges and higher institutions of learning. So is it possible to find out how many children there are out there? Because maybe there are less. I doubt it, but it would be interesting to know what the numbers are and how do we find that out?
I think it's a good question. For my first reaction is that we could definitely look at census data to find out age appropriate, the children's of age, you know, the population by age. I think what Lois is also bringing up is if the children are maybe eligible for public, but are they being enrolled in private or other options? And I don't know if we have access to that specific data, but we can look at the overall population that would fit within the age groups that would determine that. Representative Sen?
Thanks, Krista. I would also just point out that the delay from COVID or the situation with COVID may also lead to more kids not getting early intervention services. And so we don't know when youth come back or go into kindergarten or even first grade, if there will be an increase in developmental delays that have not been addressed or diagnosed. And I think it's kind of an open question, but I think there's definitely questions there of what that impact is going to be on special education and developmental needs.
Okay. So we can add some context in there that COVID not only affected whether or not children were going to school, but also just whether there was early interventions available to identify those children's needs to help them be ready for entering school.
Thanks, perfect.
So any other, just based on the reflection of the data, I think it sounds like there's an understanding that COVID has obviously played a part, but there's some missing information or data that might help illustrate some gaps in our ability to have a conclusive statement. Any other conclusive or reflections regarding just the data and what the data is illustrating? Hearing none. So we'll add in definitely comments that you brought up, Lois, as well as Senator Warnick, and trying to understand the eligible population of children who may or may not be enrolled in public systems. We do have a data update from our last report regarding foster youth. So we have a report that lets us know for foster youth that are children in foster care, only 28.2% were considered ready in all 6 domains compared to 50.7% of non-foster youth. So we have included that in this report to acknowledge the disparity there. I've also added some comments about the reporting requirements. This is more contextual, but the ERDC is the one that comes out with the foster care and non-foster youth kindergarten readiness data. There has been some changes to their reporting requirements, so we don't get the level of detail that we had in previous reports, although these legislative changes require that the reports be produced, I believe, annually. So we will get more frequent data. It's just not going to be at the level of detail where before we could look at the individual domains for youth and foster care and see some discrepancies. I believe last year we saw that the social emotional domain was the lowest or the greatest disparity between foster youth and non-foster youth. And we don't have an annual reporting that gives us that much detail. The data is available, likely we could find it out, but it's not as readily available as it was previously. So we have comments on that. I believe in some recommendations below, which we can get to in a second, but just the context. So again, a number of different issues that are contributing factors in future performance in this area. I have a note, I'm following up on the kinship versus non-kinship placements and how that does affect kindergarten readiness in the social emotional domain for foster care youth. The agency last year had said that they are very interested in this and wanted to continue to look at the data in that regard. So I have a follow-up on my end to do that, but also acknowledgement of other expansions and work that's been done this year. I will ask, I know that we have a few of our early learning specialists on the board. I've tried to include the influence of the integrated pre-K work from just attending ELAC meetings and other meetings. I ask that those members maybe take a look at the statement and let me know if this is accurate, and that could be offline as well, since it's a rather lengthy statement, but to acknowledge there's some confusion, some concerns around integrated PK as well as transitional kindergarten and how that might influence not only the work, but then the outcomes from the work. Lois?
That was great, Krista. That's what I was going to ask you, and happy to talk about that offline. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Ruth? Ruth, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, I keep doing that. I wonder if I'll ever learn to unmute. Given how dramatic the disparities are on foster children entering kindergarten, I'm wondering if, I think we should include numbers about the number of children in foster care and kinship care who are able to access our early learning services, whether it's ESIT or pre-K or childcare. And I think, you know, that's an important number for us to have. I know the department has hired facilitators to try to increase the number of children in care who are accessing early learning services, but I think that's an important data point for us to include. And okay. Like Lois, I think we need to have a recommendation around the fragmentation of the pre-K system that is continuing to evolve without a framework for an integrated preschool, an integrated preschool framework. So I think I would like to see the oversight board make a strong recommendation about the need for common standards and compensation levels to assure that we are able to evolve a high quality system without further fragmenting particularly our preschool programs.
Thank you, Ruth. Lois?
I'll defer to Rep. Jent, since I've been talking quite a bit, or any other members that may have comments, and then and then I'll chime in.
Okay, Representative Dent.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Lois. So now you moved that, go back where you were so I can read that, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you. So,
oops, sorry.
Going with what Ruth just stated there, need for common standards for compensation levels. Falling back to what Senator Horning said a few minutes ago about the conversation we had with many locals in our education system here in our district the other day, there's quite a disparity between the cost of living in King County and Thurston County and Grant County and Adams County. You know, there's a lot of changes across the state, and I'm concerned that we start putting common standards for compensation levels is going to further raise the cost of, you know, quality childcare and early learning, and then we're going to even lose more folks, and that concerns me quite a bit. That you know, it just isn't going to happen where I live, and we don't have enough early learning here anyway. And many of you know my passion for early learning. I think it's a great thing, but we need to keep it in check so we can put more kids in there. So I'm kind of concerned about that a little bit. So, and that's just what I see in what I'm doing. So, and with what we're hearing from our education professionals here as well.
To have that noted, Lois, did you want to follow up and respond?
I do. I want to talk about the common standards and compensation levels, especially as you look at integrated pre-K. You know, I just want to, for early learning, which is, you know, from birth to grade 3 or age 12 or 13, preschool is just a classroom. No different than our 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, our 4-year-olds. So I think it's important for us as an oversight board to look at the system in its entirety and talk about investments across the spectrum and not based on a child's age. Because I do remember when having done this work for almost 30 years and being raised in the early care and education industry, that there was a time when the focus was on 0 to 3, and now it's preschool, and then it's pre-K, and we go back and forth while our children are still where things are pretty much staying the same. So I'm hopeful that if we're going to say to make, you know, to look at the system, to look at it in its entirety, and I think looking at having standardized having those standards and compensation levels be set will, as Representative Dent say, just make it pretty much impossible for childcare to be able to operate and parents be able to afford. It's important. I do agree with Ruth on that piece, but I also know that at a time when it is extremely hard to hire staff, and we want to be able to not turn folk away from the field, but as one of my old instructors once said in early care and education, it gives us the opportunity to groom our own in a system that will support quality outcomes that are measurable, and then also supports those teachers who have great child outcomes, but you know, the idea of going, you know, maybe having to meet those standards might be challenging. So I just want to caution the oversight board in how a statement like that can be framed, or and being careful in our language and thinking about the unintentional outcomes.
Ruth, did you have additional thoughts?
Yes, I did. And your point is very well taken, both Representative Dent and Lois. And my concern in this statement is more with the expansion of pre-K through our school districts, which they receive a very high level of resources. and are able to compensate teachers at a much higher level than community-based providers. And there are no standards. There's no set standards for school district pre-K. So my concern in developing an integrated early learning system is really addressing how we assure that we continue to have community-based early learning programs and school districts programs that, how do we integrate these two? And I just don't think that enough focus has been on coming up with a solution for that. And we're going to end up with a system that really decimates our community-based providers because schools are able to pay such a higher compensation level. So when I say an integrated preschool framework, it should be probably an integrated early learning framework that assures that there are, there are robust programs for preschool and childcare in our community providers, and that I do think there need to be standards for when robust public money is provided to school districts. So sorry, that's a very long statement, but that's what I was trying to get at, and I appreciate your comments very much.
Representative Dent.
Thank you, Ruth, for those comments. I appreciate them. To the members of the board, we have lost a quorum. So it's 11:30. We're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break and see if we can recapture our quorum. So we can stay within the law of the Open Meetings Act. So I appreciate everyone's involvement here, and I appreciate this robust discussion way more than you'll ever know. But I'm trying to keep us on track. So we'll take a 15-minute break and see if we can regain our quorum. Thank you. Well, it's 11:45. The board members, and we are establishing. We know we have a quorum, but we just establish it here. So if you could just bear with us a couple of minutes as we do that, and we can get back to work. So I see that Charles and Lonnie have joined on my screen as anyway, and I believe that gives us our quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, Krista, could you establish that that we are back to 8 on our board members?
Yes, we are. We've had enough board members to reach 8 to establish quorum.
Okay, thank you. Then let's proceed with the meeting. Krista.
Let me share back the screen with the report. Okay, so where we left off was a thorough discussion around a recommendation regarding the pre-K. Well, I believe we also said this should be early learning system. Regarding integrated pre-K and transitional kindergarten. So we've tried to capture as much of that discussion as possible. There seems, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there's an agreement that there needs to be a recommendation made around more standardization regarding these different programs available and to support community providers, but maybe a little bit of disagreement on exactly what those expectations are, specific to common standards and compensation levels. Is there additional thoughts on how we wish to frame this, or it also could be an issue that the board has not had an opportunity to discuss in detail as an agenda item? We can always say that that will be a future discussion for the board to further that conversation as well. So there could be a more robust communication and decision on position on some of those issues. Any additional thoughts on that? And again, we can always take more feedback too offline.
You know, Krista, I guess I didn't put my hand up, but you know, we talk a lot about high quality, but I'm not sure that we have. I'm not sure that we have a constant definition of high quality, and you know, we might have to, you know, in the future take a look at what that actually means, and then how we could spread that across the state, so where it would fit all the, you know, all the regions of the state, because it will be different. And just, you know, because that's a little bit of a generic comment too. In order to evolve a high quality system, and I'm not exactly sure what that might mean. So just for the future, I'm just thinking of the future but I think we keep tripping over that, and you know, maybe. What I'd really like to do is to have an offline conversation with Representative Kagi and talk about, you know, how we could bring that into some kind of a common definition that would work across the state. So
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
So just to go up and cover what we just kind of skipped over since we jumped to some recommendations, we'll do some follow-up on the integrated pre-K commentary. From last year, just so the board knows, we had some recommendations in this space that were specific to reviewing. So the EOGOAC, which is the Education Opportunity Gap Oversight Accountability Committee, was required by legislation, I believe, to do a review of the WAKIDS assessment, particularly in regards to how it impacts BIPOC children. And one of the recommendations the board had from last year's report was to consider outcome measures that were more tailored to BIPOC children, rather than a standardized assessment. And so what I've done is, since those are two separate recommendations from the board, they actually covered similar territory, and that's been captured here. We do have, the report as a whole has many recommendations, but the sub-bullets that are included here really reflect on the recommendations that the board made in their own report last year that are reflected in the EOGOAC review of WAKIDS report from this year. So that is a recommendations follow-up to let everyone know that those are being moved forward. And then in regards to similar conversations we had a little bit earlier, a recommendation for this report is to really push to have more transparency around WCAG's reporting for children in foster care. I've added here reemphasized from 2021 with an elaboration. So we had comments about this in our report last year, but I've elaborated it further given some changes in the reporting requirements around kindergarten readiness and children in foster care. And so that's summarized in that bullet point. And also with last year's report, there was the STEM Alliance had made recommendations regarding aligning WCAG's to measure and support early STEM for BIPOC children. As far as I've been able to tell, this still remains in recommendation status. And so I've just simply stated that we are reemphasizing that from our 2021 report. Are there any thoughts, reflections, or additions to these recommendations regarding the kindergarten readiness outcome? Okay, and we will allow for, again, we'll send this out when we do some of these updates from this report for board members to provide additional feedback. If there's any wording issues or any changes to recommendations or additions the board would like to see. With that, we will move. So the next outcome measure page that we have some data on that's been updated is on page 20. So we are going to skip through a few of these other early learning outcome measures simply because we're waiting on data updates. We are expecting them this month. We've heard from the Office of Innovation, Accountability, and Alignment that we will get them this month. We just haven't received them yet. So bear with me as I scroll down to outcome measure to prevent child abuse and neglect on page 20. So just for a recap from last year, one of the challenges we faced in regards to this outcome measure is there's not necessarily specifically defined data or outcome that we look at, where many of the other measures in this report might be federally reported performance measures that we can clearly say this measures this issue. So prevention has been a challenge for us to capture, is to assess performance. But there are multiple data points that we've included in our last report, but we also heard from the agency this year that I'm trying to include in a one cohesive narrative regarding performance in this area. So as we can see, we list those here. So including number of families that are screened in for FAR, those that elect to have family volunteer services, the number of children in out-of-home care, and the percentage of children that re-enter care. So that balancing indicator, which we've had a lot of discussion about this year to make sure that those are always reported in tandem. And I've stated that here. So this additional statement that's in red really just reiterates what the board has said a few times this year to DCYF, which is instead of just solely reporting on or focusing on the outcome of reduced number of children in care, make sure to always discuss that in combination with the percentage of children that re-entering care to ensure that children are being returned to safe homes and are able to stay there. So I've captured that here. This additional context, this is presented all to the board this year, including different programs and pilots that the agency has started and also plans to expand as part of their prevention strategies. That was presented to the board, I believe, in March of this year from Steve Grilly's department. So that's captured here. We have some additional data for the number of CPS intakes that were screened in for FAR. Again, this is slightly out of context because this is just the number that were screened in versus the number of all intakes in comparison. We can try to work to get that data to have that context. And I'll just add that we are waiting on the family volunteer services data. This is a data point we are waiting for this month, but to look at the number of families that had a volunteer services case closed, but then experienced a subsequent screened in CPS referral after the closure of the FVS. So we are looking to get that data reported. Again, I'm just making a high level skimming since this is context. So agency prevention work, this is all information that DCYF and the Client Services and Prevention Division, headed by Steve Grilly, presented to the board earlier this year about its overall prevention strategies. So we had the conversation about the Family First Prevention Services Act work. That was in March. I misspoke earlier. That was the March meeting focus along with the provider panel. And then our July meeting focused on the agency's agency-wide work and prevention. And this is summarized in regards to that. The substance abuse and pregnancy pilot, the child welfare, early learning navigators, strengthening local families locally, home visiting, plan of safe care, family reconciliation services redesign, and motivational interviewing and the training in regards to that. And as we move down here, we've got our contributing factors and future performance. These, we have the organizational structural changes. So the fact that the agency made the decision to create the Prevention and Client Services Division to focus on prevention and make sure that's a priority and is reflective in the agency's organization. The agency has adopted their prevention theory of change. I've added in here, then they've set goals. There's been inquiries the board had last year regarding why the agency selected a 50% reduction of youth in out-of-home care by a certain date. And they presented that to the board earlier this year. So that's included. And then of course, the agency's strategic plan that prioritizes reducing the number of children in out-of-home care, balanced by ensuring that they're returning to safe homes and are not re-entering care. So that's the majority of the contextualization. And then we do have follow-up from recommendations last year. And then of course, recommendations for this year. Representative Dent.
Thank you, Krista. So I want to go back to page 21, and it's about halfway through our red paragraph. DCYF also tracks hospital injury admissions data to ensure that children and youth not coming into the child welfare system are not entering the hospital system with indication of abuse or neglect. And then we get down to page, I actually got ahead of myself. Okay, was there a percentage of children that re-enter care within 12 months? It was also in there too. So I felt that that was a little bit, if I go down to page 24 now, which is, my page numbers don't keep up with my spin in the wheel here. So I'm gonna get to 23. Now I lost what, maybe your page, yours is better. So
the
everything's moving so fast I can't keep up here.
Sorry.
So. Okay, I think we you need to go back to. I don't think our pages are the same. That's where I'm getting lost here.
It's possible they might have shifted since I'm editing live. Sometimes that will shift some content down, and I might be working off a slight one-page difference than what's in.
Okay, well, the paragraph in red where you're talking about, yeah. You know, the DCYF's goal. Here we go. This is page 22. Okay, we're talking hospital injury admissions and not coming in. We're talking about re-entering care, et cetera, right? Ensure that prevention efforts are effective. Okay, so and then we go back to the one where we're talking about the goal is to cut our foster population in half. And to me, this what I'm concerned with is, number one, we're tracking possible children that re-enter care, re-enter the foster program. You know, we don't want that to happen. Yet our goal is to cut the percentage or the population of children in half. And to me, that's, I'm not sure that's where we want to be. I mean, I wish we didn't have any kids in foster care, but I don't want the goal to overshadow protecting our kids and keeping them safe. And that's kind of what I was seeing here. If you go back, you know, I can't find that other one I was looking at, but that's my concern.
So the hope was, and maybe it's here in this contributing factor, the hope was that paragraph.
Yeah, right there. There it is. Yeah.
the hope is of the paragraph, and then this would capture that. So the board has been pretty strong in its position on this throughout the year, which is the agency has reported on the goal of reducing the number of children in care and identifying that as prevention. But the board's pushed back and really emphasized that the agency needs to equally report on the reentry rate to ensure that children are not reentering care, so that there's a reduction of youth entering care. We want to make sure that those youth are safe and that they're not going to reenter care at a later date because they're maybe returned too early or into an unsafe environment. So the board has taken the position, from what I've gathered over the year, that it's important that the agency not solely focus on reducing the number of children in out-of-home care, but when talking about that, always talk about the reentry rate as a balancing indicator. And then the other addition of the hospital admissions data and injury data was to also supplement that. And the agency has talked about how they've focused on that and make sure they're tracking that as well, to make sure that as we see the number of children and youth entering care go down, that they're not showing up in different systems. So by monitoring the hospital injury rates, they want to make sure that just because maybe there wasn't a call to CPS, it doesn't, the children that are experiencing abuse or neglect are not showing up in other systems and haven't been brought to the attention of the agency. So I think your concerns, my hope is that they're being captured in these two areas by saying the board is encouraged by the agency's monitoring of hospital injury and data to ensure that those children are not being missed, but at the same time really emphasizing the agency always needs to report on, when they're focusing on reducing the number of children in out-of-home care, to always continually focus on the balancing indicator that the reentry rate remains down as well. So it's not that those kids are not coming into care, but then reentering care at a later date to indicate that abuse is not being prevented or neglect's not being prevented. I'm hoping that's capturing.
No. I see that, and I read that. Okay. My concern, my biggest concern here is in this statement is, the number one, we take children out of the home because we want them to be safe, right? That's what we want. But we're not saying that. We're saying that we've identified the goal as a stretch goal. Okay, that's true. That's a true statement there. But observing comparative trends in other states that have rates of children in foster care that exhibit less than half of Washington State, well, I think that would have a lot to do with the state and what is their economic engine in that state, and maybe there's a lot of other contributing factors as well as how many kids may or may not be in foster care. But I think the number one thing that I want to do is we take them out. And as when the state takes a child out of the state, we've taken it out for the reason we want to keep it, commit itself to the goal of safely reducing the number of children in out-of-home care. But I think we need to understand we took them out to keep them safe, but somehow we need to say we don't want them to go back until we know they're going to be safe. I mean, I think that we need to hold DCYF to that standard that we took them out because they weren't safe. Then let's don't put them back until we know they're safe, because that's my big concern is. They're not, I don't want them to be in a position to where they're not safe any longer. And if I'm missing that, you can tell me. My ego's intact here. Tell me what I'm missing. But I just want to make sure that they're safe, and we make that statement, and DCYF can understand that, because and once we take them out, we've identified the fact that they were an unsafe environment, and then I think it's our responsibility to prove that they're going to go back into a safe environment. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then what I could do is I think this statement that we put in here is acknowledging how the board would like the agency to monitor their data and their performance in regards to claims around prevention of child care and child abuse and neglect. So this is very specific to what data they're looking at to ensure that's the case. I think your statement is maybe to emphasize that the entire intention of that monitoring of all these data sources is to ensure that their safety is priority, and that they are only returned to home or not removed from a home when the home environment is considered safe. So it's taking the data into more of the practice. So I think if I'm capturing that correctly, what I could do is add an emphasis to this statement saying the intention behind this type of monitoring of the data is to ensure that children remain in safe homes or are not returned to unsafe homes And this is the data that we expect to see monitored closely to tell us that. Does that help? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I don't know what a stronger word would be than considered safe, but if there's a stronger word, I'd like to use it, but I don't know what it would be. So I'm not a wordsmith.
Okay.
Bobby's smiling. She is a wordsmith. She might have a word.
Okay. And Senator Warnick, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thanks, Krista. And I want us to remember this conversation when we get down to section 13 or somewhere on my page 43 regarding reunification goals. I want us to remember this conversation when we get down there, because I had some of the same concerns about reaching the goals of exits and total exits and reunification, some of those same concerns about safety. So we just have to remember some of those points that we just discussed when we get down to that.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So any other board members' thoughts on what's included content-wise in here, but also those statements around the board's expectations of how the agency should be monitoring their performance regarding prevention? And I'm just going to scroll us down to the recommendations section. And again, some of the follow-up from recommendations last year, we had specific requests to understand the agency's theory of change around prevention efforts, which we heard from this year. We got some answers regarding that. And then the outcome data around that as well. And so I've provided updates on the agency's work in regard to the board's recommendations from last year. Other thoughts? Okay. We will move down. I'm going to scroll. Oh, Lois.
Thank you, Krista. I've been kind of reflecting on, I know we use encourage quite a bit throughout the report. Just wondering if we can find maybe a stronger synonym to use. Sure. Urge comes to mind. I just think just using something that might be, I don't know, just has a stronger connotation than encourage.
Is there I'll definitely take note of that for the report overall. Is there a specific place you're seeing it right now that I can address?
If you go up, it says we encourage DCYF to, and we use that quite a bit. I think maybe I like urge better than encourage.
Okay.
Just a stronger, it's more of an action word.
Got it. Okay. Is the board comfortable with that?
This is Charles. I would support that.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Okay.
This is Bobby. Me too.
And I do too.
That sounds like support to me. So, okay, so replace encourage with urge. And I'll put throughout the report, and that will be something I will work on to scan the report to make sure that that's reflected. Thank you.
This is Lonnie. Sorry to unmute late. I also support that word as well.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Agreed.
Thank you. Resounding support. Okay. So we'll make those changes in our next version. Any other thoughts on recommendations, or I guess mostly recommendations regarding prevention? And we'll reemphasize some of the comments made here to make sure it's reflected, but I wanted to, we have some additional. So the recommendations here include, this is reemphasized from previously, but the reporting on prevention services, prioritizing IT upgrades to the Family First Prevention Services Act funding. So that was an issue that was brought to our attention in March, that FFPSA funding has not been, they were not able to access it regarding some IT challenges that were required for reporting. So the board seemed pretty clear that that's a priority to make sure we can access those fundings to improve prevention services. And then I also included a recommendation on the transparency around the agency's thinking, strategy, and implementation on multi-year planning for multi-initiatives and projects. So this is meant to summarize all the large-scale policy reforms that the agency has been working through the last couple of years regarding both court decisions, but also policy reforms from the legislature from the last couple of sessions. And the board, what was gathered was that the board is hearing that's a challenging work to make sure that's all considered and implemented efficiently and effectively, with also considerations of how it impacts the workforce. But there hasn't been a lot of transparency on what that planning and implementation looks like. So really calling for a better understanding of strategy and thinking around how that rollout is happening, so people can understand more the intention behind that. Lois? Lois, if you're speaking, you're on, yeah.
No,
okay.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Oh, okay. So those are 3 areas of recommendations from meetings this year when the board has heard about the agency's prevention strategies. Okay. Hearing none, I will move on to our next section. So due to data updates, we're going to move all the way down to outcome measure number 10. And we will come back to the outcomes at our next meeting, once we get these data updates. So I'm going to scroll down, which starts on my pages on page 33. And this is reducing the number of children that re-enter out of home care in 12 months, in a 12-month period. And I do want to recognize we have about 17 minutes left on the review process. And then we have public comment period. So I just want to make sure we stay in accordance with that. Oh, here we go. Sorry, starting on page 34. So in our previous report, the last data point we had was for state fiscal year 2018. So as a reminder, this is a lagged analysis, and that's due to how it is measured regarding a cohort of youth. Once they are out of care, they do have a 12-month period by which they see if a child re-enters care within that 12 months. I've talked to the agency, I believe, and we can get down to, I think some of the feedback was if there's another way to measure this, the agency finds this is the most accurate way to measure this, but it does mean that we have a delayed understanding of what happens in a given calendar year because we have to allow for that time period to pass to see whether or not a youth that exits care and re-enters care the following year. So last year in our report, we had the state fiscal year data point that said 8.4% of children re-entered care within the following 12 months. We've gotten a recent update for the state fiscal year 2019 that reflects that that's reduced. And we make a statement of that here, and it has have updated the data point. The federal target, so across the country, is 7%. So the agency is slightly above that this first 2019, but was previously much higher. And due to that, we had off track as our performance status on this outcome area at our last report. We've obviously seen a decrease. All of this additional context is explaining the measure, why it's measured the way it is, as well as reflecting on the priority within the strategic plan and measures regarding the agency's strategic plan. For context, we know that regarding decision-making around reentry into care, the family practice model is under redesign, and how the agency interacts with families in a more standardized manner across the state. And then we have a follow-up on recommendations from 2021. This is where the board made recommendations about revising the performance measure. And I state here that after that discussion with the agency, they've determined that it's a standard method of measuring reentry rates and the most useful to assess performance across the agency. The agency does track reentry rates by region, and it utilizes this information to identify when trends indicate differences in the use of safety framework between regions. The agency also currently is redesigning the family practice model through a co-design process to ensure standardization across the state. So that was the agency's response to the board's recommendation last year. And then here I've highlighted again to prioritize seeking IT funding for the FFPSA to be able to access those funds to improve prevention services available to families. And then again, reemphasizing the importance of reporting reentry rates not only alongside the rate of children entering out of home care, but also we've had discussion earlier this year about youth who may re-enter care during their trial return home period. So that's the 30 or 60-day trial return home period. And we had a follow-up question from the board regarding that has the board would like to see reported more frequently. And that's to ensure obviously children are not returning home and then coming back into care very quickly, but because they return home too soon. Ruth?
Thank you. I have noted throughout the report the frequent reference to the department relying on data or their analysis of data in their decision making. And that was one of the core concepts in the original bill, that we would have an agency that based decision making on data. So I think it's worth making that observation in this report that the department really has been making progress on making database decisions. Okay. But the big piece to me that's missing here, and from what I've reviewed of the report, is the workforce issue and the impact that has on all of the placement data. Returning kids home, taking them out, in many sections of the report. And we have heard directly as a board from the workforce about the challenges facing them, particularly around staffing shortages and the lack of support when they experience trauma. And I'm just hoping that that we address that somewhere in the report and make a recommendation that the department really, I know there's reference to the work they've been doing, but it does not appear that at the ground level that staff are experiencing the support that the department is working to put in place. So I just think we need to create a sense of urgency about that so that staff are better supported.
Thank you, Ruth. Lois?
I just want to second what Ruth shared. I was waiting for this section, and Ruth just succinctly shared what I wanted to make sure we include a strong recommendation that there be some efforts put in place to support staff in a trackable, tangible way, so that to ensure that they are receiving the type of the services that they need in order to process and to be able to make it on the other side of the trauma that they are involved in by supporting families. Because we have a system that's in place that doesn't do that, then we end up just adding to that cycle of trauma, not just for children that are supported, but for the families, and quite frankly, the families of the boots on the ground that are doing this work, as their families try to help them process through their emotions and the psychological impacts of supporting our neediest families. So I know that was very long way to say I agree with Ruth, but I think that language needs to be included in whatever recommendation that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lois. And Bobby?
Yeah, I would agree with both of those comments. And I too was wondering when we're going to talk about it, because of course it's the subject of a lot of our public comment, not just today's meeting, but, you know, in the past. And I recognize, you know, a lot of this is subject to collective bargaining and all of the details, but I think, you know, making a generic and concrete statement about our recognition of the issues confronting the workforce, I think is very important. And I'm not sure that having it in one space is sufficient. I mean, I think it's an overarching issue, and so maybe that when the summary comes, the executive summary, if you will, that would be as much as we need. But I do think that it's this issue is reflected or impacted by a whole bunch of these sections, some of which we aren't going to talk about today, even because of the lack of data right now. So I just want to put another exclamation point on it, I guess.
Thank you. Charles.
Obviously I agree with everything that Ruth and Lois and
no
Bobby
way, I'm
said. Just thank you all for saying that. That means a lot personally. Just on the topic, one piece that I think the board has heard about from the department this year, and that I would encourage us to include, is the I guess the communication and relationship from senior management to line staff, particularly in child welfare, is where I can speak to. I'm not sure if that might be also across juvenile rehabilitation and early learning as well. But I think we do see a disconnect in like just understanding what the work actually looks like day to day as we make policy. And I think Secretary Hunter even acknowledged that in the last presentation that he gave, wanting to improve on incorporating staff in policy making more. So I think that would be something that I would encourage, and have that communication go two directions, so that folks in positions making policies and agency level decisions are familiar with the day-to-day work would be, I think, meaningful.
Thank you, Charles. Lois?
So to piggyback on what Charles said, Ruth had asked me earlier about specific recommendations, and I think that incorporating what Charles shared about having that two-way communication between the field and leadership is valuable to showing a respect for the workforce, as well as being able to have policies that simply make sense and can be implemented. But I think the other piece is encouraging, you know, as an example, what they could do is ensuring that that feedback is shared out with staff in the form of some type of feedback loop. And if suggestions are not incorporated, to explain to the staff why. Because meeting with someone and sharing out an idea, and you share this and that and the other, and it's never implemented, you know, that's just going to continue to degrade morale. So whatever they put in place, it needs to be something that acknowledges that input and why or why not suggestions are not being incorporated.
Great, thank you. So summary sounds like there's definitely an overarching position the board would like to make regarding workforce supports, and we'll make that much earlier in the report, but also highlight it throughout the report to really drive home the importance of it, the value of it, the impact on the outcomes, as well as to make specific concrete recommendations, such as the one that Lois just mentioned regarding a feedback loop, but the expectation that there's actually responses to whether or not certain feedback from the workforce is incorporated or not, and to really push the transparency around that. Lois, did you have something else?
I did. I'm sorry. This kind of goes back when you said workforce and made me think about something earlier, and the child care piece is making sure we put a question in there what DCYF is doing to confirm that that's the correct number of family and licensed child care homes that are actually open. But I know, especially with family homes, they can close their doors, and unless a licensor comes out to visit, you know, if you think about closing a business, that can be traumatic, regardless of what the reasons are. So just because someone has a license doesn't necessarily mean that they're open. So I just think making sure that they put something in place to, a system in place to be able to confirm that their data is accurate.
So just for the board's transfer, I think that's going to be best suited, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lois, under the increasing the available supply of licensed childcare, but we haven't reviewed that outcome measure as a board yet, simply because we're waiting on some data updates. But I'm just putting that in there as a placeholder to develop that recommendation in that space.
Yes, I know we are, but had to share why it was on my mind. I wouldn't forget. So thank you.
Of course, no problem. Happy to do it. Justice Bridge?
Yeah, I just want to go back to this workforce thing again. And I probably should know the answer to this, but I think we need to loop in any kind of statement we make to their strategic plan. And I don't recall to what extent workforce issues that we've talked about or concerns are established, are recognized in that strategic plan, and what, if anything, is recommended in that strategic plan for engagement with the workforce. For example, you know, is there conversation in that strategic plan about developing, you know, earlier engagement of the workforce in policy development, the two-way communication that Lois describes it, et cetera. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think we need to, if there is a statement about it, we ought to somehow coordinate what we say or reflect back and tie that up. And if there isn't, then we ought to urge that it be a part of the strategic planning.
So it's definitely in the strategic plan. I apologize for the scrolling. I'm sure this is not pleasant to watch from a screen. We do have a section in the very beginning of the report that I've been working on, that part of our report is to review the strategic plan. And we've done that in great detail in last year's report. But I did emphasize by going portion by portion of the strategic plan to reflect what the board's heard this year regarding specifics in that plan and progress being made. So here's this section. I apologize for the scrolling.
Okay.
This starts on page 7.
I'm dizzy, but that's okay.
My apologies. So this starts on page 7.
Representative Dan had the same experience.
I'm so sorry. But under the strategic plan, I will point out that we have the major bucket areas. We're reflecting.
This would be the improved quality and attention. Okay.
Exactly. So the major areas they've looked at in the are specific to child welfare, early learning, and JR. They have our transitions to adulthood. They have big priority areas of that, but they have 2 additional sections in their strategic plan that focus on improving quality and intention of practice, as well as the availability of provider services. And within this, they do specifically talk about care for staff and a supportive supervisory management system and so on and so forth. So here I've tried to capture what we've heard from the agency this year, but I can go back and definitely pull out specifics that they've outlined in their report.
Right, and that's, and if that's it, then what we're adding here is this issue of early communication, hearing the voices, communicating back, et cetera, in addition to the trauma-related issues.
Absolutely. So I'll make that call out here.
Thanks.
Yeah. And due to our time on the agenda, I'm going to have us pause the report review. I'm going to ask that a discussion point be made in how we want to proceed, knowing that we've only gotten through a fraction of what we were hoping to get today, and we have 1 more board meeting currently scheduled for the rest of this calendar year. If we have time at the end of the agenda today, Representative Dent, if you wouldn't mind just presenting to the board what the board would like to do regarding further review of this report, if it's an additional meeting or a Google document to provide offline recommendation or edits. But with that, I want to hand it back to Representative Dent so we can have our public comment period.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our board members, I'm going to ask you to think about this as we go through the public comment, but if we might, we planned 1 more meeting this year and hope to finish the report, but this, our review of the report has gone much slower than we had anticipated, as Krista just mentioned. So perhaps we could look at even a longer meeting at our next meeting, or perhaps we could have add a second meeting someplace. So think about that a little bit, and when we get to the end of the meeting, then we can discuss that in greater detail. But we do have some folks that wish to provide public comments, so we'll move into that now. And I'll read the public comment statement. The DCYF Oversight Board is governed by state law. Per state law, the Oversight Board's authority includes monitoring DCYF's achievement of 8 outcome measures listed in DCYF's founding legislation, monitoring DCYF's compliance with applicable laws and policies pertaining to early learning, juvenile rehabilitation, juvenile justice, and children and family services, general oversight of DCYF's performance and policies, and providing advice and input to DCYF. The legislature and the governor, and input to DCYF, the legislature and the governor. The Oversight Board does not have authority to inquire into, direct, or change DCYF decisions in individual cases. For those wishing to provide public comment to the board, we would like to remind you that the board is subject to the Open Public Meetings Act, which means our meetings are open to the public and anyone can attend as an observer. Our meetings are recorded and posted on the Oversight Board's website and will be broadcast on TVW. We wish to inform everyone in attendance of this fact as an act of respect and support to individuals who may have a sensitive story they wish to share or wish to express individual case details in this setting. The Oversight Board may use any information brought to the board's attention as it carries out its role of general oversight and monitoring of DCYF. If individuals do not wish to provide public comment in an open meeting, individuals may contact the DCYF Oversight Board staff to get connected to the board's co-chairs. We're also more than happy to connect you with the Office of Family and Children Ombuds if you wish to file a complaint about DCYF's actions or failure to act in a particular way. Their website is www.ofco.wa.gov. So we do have a few folks here, but I would like to bring to the attention of the board and the public that we received 7 written comments and Krista mailed them out on October 18th. I've read these, I haven't read them all. I've read the majority of them, and I'd encourage the board to read these comments. They are very, they're interesting, and some folks put some real thought into what they were doing. So I do appreciate for those that sent in the written comments, as well as those who public comment here orally. So our first person today for public comment is Tates Nunez. I hope I said that right. Tates?
You did, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, thank you. Go ahead, proceed.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak once again on behalf of Life Away Missing Persons Advocacy Project. I will just let everyone know that there is some sensitive material in my letter. Dear Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families Oversight Board Committee members, I'm asking to read my comment aloud today to share the story once again of Oakley Carlson with hope that you will advocate to Governor Inslee for an immediate outside agency review that will provide transparency and an impartial analysis of Oakley Carlson's Washington DCYF case. I'm a founding member of an organization called Light the Way Missing Persons Advocacy Project. Our team members have been investigating and advocating for Oakley Carlson, the 5-year-old missing from Oakville, Washington. We are working with Oakley's loving and courageous foster parents, Jamie, Joe, and Eric Hiles, to find answers for Oakley, whose last known credible sighting was on February 10, 2021. Sadly, she was not discovered to be missing until 10 months later. I'm here to comment on the findings of the investigation requested by Governor Inslee on May 27, 2022 about Oakley Carlson's Washington DCYF case. Patrick Dowd, the director of the Office of Family and Children's Ombuds, stated, "We found that the department's actions and conduct in this case were consistent with laws, policies, and court orders. Both the Hiles family and Light the Way Missing Persons Advocacy Project disagree with this statement and have been publicly sharing our well-documented and verified timeline to show that social worker Angela Price and supervisor Catherine Eddy did not follow up when the Hiles sent messages and made phone calls about their concerns in regards to Oakley's safety when in their care and even after Oakley was returned to Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, and to show negligence in Oakley Carlson's Washington DCYF case. There are RCWs we believe are unquestioned by Washington DCYF's actions and that Jamie Joe brought to Mr. Dowd's attention that clearly were not investigated further if this report showed no wrongdoings. Mr. Dowd stated that parent-child visits are critical to a successful family reunion and that reunification planning should not only focus on a parent's successful compliance with services, but should also address parent-child bonding and attachment issues. Our question to Mr. Dowd is that if Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson were provided with more family time with Oakley, would they not have physically beaten her, locked her in a cabinet, starved her, and possibly murdered her? We adamantly believe that Mr. Dowd was not able to remain impartial with his ties to the leadership of Washington DCYF and will continue to advocate for an outside agency review to Oakley Carlson's case. We want the board to understand that Oakley was failed. Here's another example. On November 6, 2021, the fire at Bowers and Carlson's home at 177 Bartell Road in Oakville, Washington. Andrew Carlson, Oakley's biological father, claims the fire started around 10 a.m., but did not report it until 16:54 p.m. He tells dispatch that they spent 4 hours putting the fire out themselves and that there was no need for dispatch to respond. He stated that his 4-year-old daughter, Oakley, used a cigarette lighter and the couch caught fire. On November 17, 2021, a GoFundMe was created to benefit Jordan Bowers, Oakley's biological mother, by Anna Johnson after the fire at 177 Bartell Road residence. No one is ever able to locate Anna Johnson after the GoFundMe is created. November 18, 2021, Jamie Jo Hiles emailed Washington DCYF caseworker Angela Fries and her supervisor, Catherine Eddy, at Washington DCYF to let them know about the fire and suspicious GoFundMe. Jamie Jo did not receive a response. I have attached the email in the letter that I sent via email. November 19, 2021, Jamie Jo Hiles called Washington DCYF about the fire and her concerns about Oakley and her siblings' safety. On December 6, 2021, Oakley Carlson was discovered missing after a school principal called for a welfare check. Why did it take Washington DCYF 18 days before they checked on Oakley Carlson and her siblings? They received an email and phone call that there was a fire and a suspicious GoFundMe from Jamie Jo Hiles, who was a mandated reporter and who was concerned about a child who was previously in her care. The lack of urgency for the safety of these children was abhorrent and alarming. Oakley Carlson was taken from a safe and loving foster home and left in a home with child abuse, drug use, and what ultimately ended in the devastating story of a missing child, possibly worse. If Washington DCYF focused less on meeting reunification statistics and more on the best interests of the children, Oakley might be here right now. I imagine that she would be picking out her Halloween costume with Jamie Jo and Eric Hiles, the two parents who loved her the most in this world. Please help us in advocating for an immediate outside agency review of Oakley Carlson's Washington DCYF case, where there can be impartiality and transparency in finding justice for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Tates. We appreciate your comments today. Next will be Mark Poto. Mark, are you there? Yeah, I see you now.
Okay, can you hear me now, sir?
I can hear you, Mark. Thank you. Go ahead.
About that, I was using my phone. We're traveling. It took me a little time here. The DCYF Oversight Committee serves a very important function. We appreciate and respect the transparency that it provides, and we're happy that it was created. This forum is actually the only place where we've heard in about 5 years of dealing with DCYF that the safety of the child is paramount. We love to hear that. A recent meeting regarding critical incidents was shocking and heartbreaking. There has been a sharp increase in death and near-death incidents with child fatality risk factors of substance abuse, mental health, and domestic violence. These unacceptable deaths and near deaths should be the department's #1 priority. Ross Hunter and the leaders are responsible for all that goes right and for things that go wrong or don't go well. More root cause analysis is needed. I love the focus on the data, selecting good leading indicators, lagging indicators, doing great incident management, and great real root cause analysis to get to the source of the problems will help with problem management that's effective and takes your lagging indicators where you want them to go. In the case of Oakley Carlson, for example, who is not even counted in these statistics, there really should be a deep dive into the question of the actual root cause. Was the systemic focus of reunification and return to home the root cause? The priority comes before the priority of return to home or reunification comes before best interest of the child, and really ignores the mental health and physical safety of the child, especially the mental health, I think. But today, similar cases where a child has maybe never resided with a parent, but after many years in a loving home with a family where that child is loved and loves, is then being pushed by DCYF toward a so-called reunification. We understand the focus of the committee is not to a specific case, but rather on systemic challenges and opportunities. We see the secondary focus of child safety by DCYF as one of the challenges that is going to result in perpetual health and safety issues for children who have been in DCYF dependency. The return to home legislation I reviewed appears to have been unanimously approved by both parties. I'm always a little wary of things that are unanimously approved, that they maybe need a little more thought and attention. I believe both parties should partner to address the unacceptable death toll that we now have. To put critical incidents into perspective, there were 77 OFCO examined fatalities in 2021. As reported by the state, in 22 months of COVID, there was a total of 22 deaths in all children and youth in Washington reported from January 1st, 21 to October 1st, 22. Please keep a focus on critical incidents at each meeting. Please assign the action items and status those items in each meeting. The problem is not likely to be entirely eliminated. And since one child death is too many, critical incidents should be a standing topic for status, so course corrections can be easily or quickly made. And really, I want to urge a deeper root cause analysis. I've spent decades doing this kind of data munging for global services for big technology companies, and it can be done, and I think it is the right path. It also can be a double-edged sword and can lead to the wrong investments if it's not really, if the investment of identifying the right data points to track and pursue is not effective. Finally, I just want to thank you for this important forum and for the opportunity to share our concerns. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And I appreciate your taking the time and making the effort to share your comments and your thoughts. We do appreciate that. And the last person we have for public comment today is Jim Theophilus. Jim?
Hi there. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you fine, Jim. Thank you. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Well, I too want to say thank you for this opportunity and for the hard and smart work y'all are doing. And I want to start by saying that I have talked to Secretary Hunter and Steve Grilly and others about what I'm prepared to comment on. And I also want to say, I I know I have been kind of a mosquito to DCYF over the years in some ways, something to bat away. But I really want to say how appreciative I am to so many of the efforts that are going on right now, including their embracing of key reform bills like 1747, 1194, 1227. Was in a meeting with Secretary Hunter where I told him how much I appreciate his phrasing and framing of what he calls wanting to build a kinship culture. Again, in the spirit of making sure children and young people are with families. So I come to this really feeling as good as I have in many ways, including the establishment of the adolescent unit, where I have to say one of my challenges with DCYF and even before DCYF was, I think, a myopic sort of framing of we can either protect babies or adolescents, and we prioritize babies. And that's not to suggest I don't think they care about adolescents, but I think the traditional child welfare, that was a frame that I have heard many times over the years. And as many of you know, I love babies. In fact, I am a new grandpa for the first time of a little baby. So I'm even more in love with babies these days. And I think the system has to be challenged to protect babies and serve adolescents who, by the way, were once babies in the very same system. And so that development of the adolescent unit, even though it got off to a slow start and I butted heads with some of the staff there about how fast we need to go, it was the first time in my 40 plus years of serving children, youth, and families in this state. It was the first time that I truly saw a statewide systemic strategy to meet the needs of adolescents. And as we know, youth of color and queer youth are overrepresented, not only in foster care, but unfortunately as often a feeder system into homelessness, CSEC life, et cetera, when those older adolescents decide they don't want to go to their 15th foster home and start running away. So I just really want to say that for the first time, and I think one of the things about the adolescent unit is it was, as I sort of alluded to, the first structural change that addressed equity that I could see, precisely because so many of these adolescents are youth of color. So what we have now is a team that has been brought together and really has had about 6 months to stand itself up, is working on many of the legislative reform bills related to family reconciliation services, independent living, extended foster care, a number of critical programs that strengthen the current and future life of adolescents in our foster care child welfare system. So the plan now is to pull that adolescent unit apart and redeploy the staff across the state agency. And while I certainly appreciate that any executive has the right and needs to have the right to reorganize and restructure whenever they think they need to get best results, it's confusing to me why why the department is making this decision to do this now, when again, the team is involved in so much important work, just getting stood up. It just really is sad to me, quite frankly, that the first intentional, and I would challenge anyone to show me over the years a different example where there was a more strategic, intentional approach to specifically support and strengthen adolescents. And so I just am bringing to, I think it may be a boundary. I don't know if it's what you all can do, but I hope we can at least ask, what problem are we trying to solve by discombobulating this team? That really we've spent a fair amount of money hiring folks and bringing it together, and then to disassemble it within a very short period of time, particularly given when it's been fully staffed. So what problem are we trying to solve? Why was what we were doing not working? Because it looks from the outside like it was working. So what do I want? At a minimum, I have asked Secretary Hunter to pause the implementation of this new model and to keep this team together, talk to community advocates, talk to makes for safe space internally to ask staff internally about what do you think was working about the adolescent unit, but to pause it. And if they don't pause it, then at least develop some metrics so that we know how is going back to what I would consider to be traditional child welfare. And again, this is not, I know Ross Hunter cares about adolescents. He's the father of extended foster care when he was a legislator. And I know there are staff within DCYF all who care about adolescents. But this feels to me like we're going back to traditional care where this focus is going to be dispersed. People will have many, many different priorities to attend to. So what problem are we trying to solve? And what are the metrics that we're going to manage the outcomes for? How do we know if this is going back to traditional child welfare practice or if it's getting better results for adolescents? Because it just defies common sense for me, and I'll close here soon. It defies common sense that somehow there's going to be the same level of attention and focus when you disperse this team as when you have a dedicated team that wakes up every day thinking about how to protect and embellish the lives of the adolescents in our care. So thank you for letting me speak to this. And I would encourage I would be open to any conversations outside of this. But again, where's the hope and promise for the adolescent that is facing yet another foster home placement, who's hit the streets and is thinking about coming back to the system? It was the adolescent unit that for me had the most hope and promise that I've seen in 40 plus years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jim, for sharing your comments and your insight. I always appreciate your insights and your experience in this arena. It is most certainly appreciated by me for sure, and I'm sure by the majority of the board. So thank you. Folks, once again, we have lost a quorum. So what I've been communicating here with Krista, I think what we'd like to do is look forward, and we're barely into this report, so we're going to have to look at probably 2 meetings to finish this and do the other work that's in front of us, in front of the board before the end of the year. So Krista will be sending out a poll and see how we can put together a couple of meetings to where we can have a quorum and get folks to promise that they will be there so we have a quorum. It's it's stressful when we don't have one and we're trying to finish this important work, and it is important. So we'll do that. And then also there's some folks here whose terms will be coming, be ending on the board. So if you could let us know if you're going to intend to stay on the board or not, we'd appreciate knowing that as well. So, and let's see that we have a hand here by Lois. You have a comment or question?
I do. I just wanted to put forward to the board just something to think about with the members that are here. If it's possible, when we receive those public comment letters, I know Krista and Nicholas include them in with the minutes, but after reading those letters, they're so impactful and powerful. I know it would take more time, but I think it's only fair for those, even in the public, that took the time to attend to be able to hear it. So that means we need to add a little bit more time to a meeting. I am hopeful that our board members will be open to that.
Thank you, Lois. I appreciate those comments.
I will agree. Go
ahead.
Sorry, Representative. Can I clarify, Lois, what your request was regarding the written public comments?
Sure. I would like for them to be read out loud at the meeting. That was my request. So if we need to take a little bit more time in our meeting to allow for that, I'm hopeful that board members will be open to it.
we can sure discuss that at our next meeting, or maybe the second next meeting. Let's, but for now, Bobby's been laughing a lot today. Is there any other comments that from anyone? Questions? No. So we'll Krista will put together an email, a poll. We'll see how we can bring 2 more meetings back together. And I know that's a challenge. And I really hate to ask everyone of that because I'm the guy who likes to do less meetings, not more. But I think this report is really important, and I really am amazed, or I'm excited about the amount of engagement we've had today. It's been excellent, and I really appreciate that part. So we'll do our best to put together 2 more meetings so we can get through our work before the end of the year and do what we're charged to do. So again, I thank everyone for your participation and for your passion for our young people. It means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to Representative Kagi as well, because she's about as passionate as I am on some of these things. So thank you, and we'll be in touch.
I